In 1934, a plate of spaghetti with tomato sauce cost 3 cents on Mulberry Street. 3 cents. Families of 8 survived on less than $12 a week, and every single meal was a negotiation between hunger and the empty pocket. But here is what nobody tells you. Those Depression-era Italian kitchens invented dishes that Michelin-starred restaurants now charge $40 to recreate. Number 18 on this list was considered poverty food so shameful that families refused to talk about it. And number 7 created a flavor reaction that modern food science still cannot fully explain. These 30 foods were not recipes. They were acts of survival. Before we start, hit subscribe, because what these immigrant families pulled off with almost nothing will change how you look at every Italian meal you have ever eaten. Number 30. Bread and olive oil. Before it showed up on restaurant tables as a fancy appetizer, bread dipped in olive oil was breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner in Little Italy tenements. Families on Mott Street bought day-old bread from Parisi Bakery for a penny a loaf. Too stale to eat alone, but perfect when torn into chunks and soaked in cheap olive oil, with a sprinkle of coarse salt. A tin of olive oil cost about 35 cents in 1933 and lasted a family 2 weeks if the mother measured carefully. Children sat on fire escapes in the summer heat, tearing bread and passing the oil between them. The flavor was simple, grassy, peppery oil soaking into dense, chewy crumb. No butter, no cheese, just bread and fat and survival. Italian mothers called it pane e olio and never apologized for it. Today, restaurants charge $14 for the same thing and call it rustic. In 1934, it was called Tuesday. Number 29. Polenta with drippings. Cornmeal mush saved more Italian families during the Depression than any government relief program. A 5-pound sack of cornmeal cost about 15 cents and could feed a family for a week. Mothers stirred the yellow grain into boiling salted water for 40 minutes, arms aching, wooden spoons scraping the bottom of the pot to keep it from burning. The finished polenta was poured onto a wooden board and sliced with a string. Leftover meat drippings, pork fat, or a spoonful of tomato sauce went on top. In the coldest months, fried slices of day-old polenta replaced bread entirely. Children carried cold polenta wrapped in newspaper to school, eating it at lunch while American kids stared. Families from the Veneto and Friuli regions had eaten polenta for generations. But in Little Italy, it became the food of last resort, the dish that meant the money had run out. Number 28. Dandelion greens. Every spring, Italian women appeared in Central Park, Prospect Park, and empty lots across the city, bent low with paring knives, cutting wild dandelion greens that other New Yorkers considered weeds. They filled cloth sacks and carried them home to tenement kitchens, where the greens were washed 3 times, boiled until tender, then sautéed with garlic and red pepper flakes in olive oil. The bitter flavor was an acquired taste, but the greens were free and packed with iron. Bellevue Hospital doctors noted that Italian immigrant children showed fewer signs of malnutrition than other groups in the same neighborhoods. The dandelion greens were part of the reason. Mothers served them with beans, or alongside bread, sometimes with a squeeze of lemon, if one could be found cheap at the pushcart. Neighbors from other backgrounds watched the Italians harvesting weeds and thought them strange. Those same greens now sell for $4 a bunch at Whole Foods. Number 27. Pasta e fagioli. Pasta and beans was the undisputed king of Depression-era Little Italy. A pound of dried beans cost 5 cents. A pound of pasta cost 8 cents. Together they made a soup thick enough to stand a spoon in, packed with protein, and capable of feeding 8 people from one pot. Every family had a version. Some used kidney beans, others preferred cannellini or lentils. The pasta was always the broken bits, the short ends and cracked pieces sold loose for less than whole boxes. Mothers simmered the beans for hours with a ham bone or a rind of Parmigiano. adding the pasta in the final minutes so it would not turn to mush. The broth was thick, starchy, and deeply savory. Children came running when they smelled it. Fathers soaked bread in the last of the liquid. Nothing was left in the pot. Pasta e fagioli was democracy in a bowl. Rich or poor, everyone in the neighborhood ate it, and no one pretended it was anything other than what it was: survival that tasted like home. Number 26, fried dough. When there was nothing else in the cupboard, there was flour, water, and a little oil. Mothers mixed a simple dough, pulled off pieces, stretched them thin, and fried them in a shallow pan until golden and blistered. Sprinkled with salt for supper, or dusted with sugar for a treat, fried dough appeared on tables across Little Italy whenever the budget hit zero. The smell of frying bread drifted through hallway windows and down the stairwells of Mulberry Street tenements. Children fought over the crispiest pieces. A pound of flour cost about 4 cents in 1935. This was food made from almost nothing, filling bellies when the icebox was bare. Italians called it pizza fritta, and variations of it existed in every southern Italian province. It was not a recipe anyone wrote down. It was the kind of cooking hands knew. That happened when a mother looked at hungry faces and made something from air. Number 25, escarole and beans. Escarole, that sturdy bitter green that wilted beautifully in hot broth, became a staple pairing with white cannellini beans in tenement kitchens. A head of escarole cost 2 or 3 cents from the pushcart vendors on the First Avenue. Mothers sautéed garlic until golden, added the torn escarole, let it wilt, then poured in cooked beans with their starchy liquid. A crust of Parmigiano rind went in if the family could afford it, simmering until the rind melted into the broth and turned it silky. The dish was served in shallow bowls with bread for dipping. It was light enough for summer, warm enough for winter, and cheap enough for every day. Number 24, egg drop soup, Italian style. Stracciatella had nothing to do with ice cream in the 1930s. Little Italy, it was a rescue soup. Mothers brought salted water or thin chicken broth to a rolling boil and slowly drizzled in beaten eggs mixed with a handful of grated cheese and a pinch of breadcrumbs. The eggs formed ragged ribbons, cooking instantly in the hot liquid. The whole pot took less than 5 minutes and cost almost nothing. When a child was sick, when the money was gone, when there was nothing left but eggs and stale bread, stracciatella appeared. It was warm, gentle, and filling. A 1-egg soup that could stretch to feed 3 children. Number 23, stuffed artichokes. Italian mothers turned a single artichoke into a meal by stuffing the leaves with seasoned breadcrumbs, garlic, grated cheese, and parsley, then steaming the whole thing until tender. Artichokes sold for just a few cents each at the Italian pushcarts that lined 9th Avenue. The breadcrumb stuffing stretched the vegetable into something substantial, and the ritual of pulling each leaf, scraping the filling with your teeth, made the meal last longer than it had any right to. Families sat around the table, passing 1 or 2 artichokes between them, making an event out of scarcity. Number 22nd, lard bread. Bakeries on Elizabeth Street sold lard bread for pennies, a dense loaf studded with chunks of rendered pork fat and cracked black pepper. The lard melted into pockets during baking, creating a bread that was rich, savory, and filling enough to serve as a meal on its own. Families bought it on Saturdays, slicing it thick for lunch or tearing it apart at supper. The smell of baking lard bread drifting from the ovens at Adeo's or Parisi's was the smell of the neighborhood itself. A single loaf cost a nickel and fed 4. When the bread went stale, mothers sliced it thin and fried it in a pan, creating something entirely new and almost better than the original. Number 21, peppers and eggs. This was the sandwich that built Little Italy. Sweet bell peppers, fried until soft in olive oil with scrambled eggs, were stuffed into a crusty Italian roll. Construction workers, dock workers, and garment laborers carried peppers and egg sandwiches wrapped in wax paper to job sites across Manhattan. A dozen eggs cost about 25 cents in 1934. Peppers were a few cents each in season. The combination was cheap, portable, and satisfying. The peppers turned silky and sweet from the long fry. The eggs soaked into the bread. No meat was needed. Mothers made these sandwiches at 5 in the morning before the men left for work. The wax paper would be spotted with oil by noon, and the bread would be slightly soggy, which somehow made it better. First pattern break. Here is where the story shifts. See, Italian immigrants did not just stretch food. They transformed scraps into dishes that American food culture eventually adopted without giving credit. That Sunday gravy, simmering on every stove in Little Italy, was born from necessity. A single piece of cheap meat, braciole or a pork neckbone, was simmered for 6 to 8 hours in tomato sauce. The meat flavored the sauce. The sauce flavored the pasta. One ingredient did 2 jobs. Mothers started the pot at 7 in the morning. By noon, the smell had crept through the building, up the stairs, into every apartment. Neighbors knew what you were eating. There were no secrets on Mulberry Street. Children were sent to check the pot, to stir, to taste. The sauce darkened from bright red to a deep brick color over those hours. Fathers came home from whatever work they could find, and the pasta was dropped into boiling water. This was not just dinner. It was the organizing principle of the entire week. Everything led to Sunday. Number 19. Tripe. The honeycomb stomach lining of a cow was one of the cheapest proteins available in Depression-era butcher shops, selling for just a few cents a pound when other cuts were out of reach. Italian mothers cleaned and boiled tripe for hours, then simmered it in tomato sauce with onions, celery, and white beans until it turned tender and absorbed the flavors around it. The smell was strong and divided households. Children either loved the soft, chewy texture or refused to touch it. But tripe was a full meal for almost nothing. Butchers on Bleecker Street kept it in enamel trays behind the counter, knowing it would sell out to Italian women before noon every Saturday. Number 18. Bread soup. Pancotto was the dish families were ashamed to talk about. Stale bread boiled in water with garlic, a drizzle of olive oil, and maybe an egg cracked in at the end. It was not really a recipe. It was hunger made edible. Families who had run through everything else turned to the bread that was too hard to chew and boiled it into a porridge. Some versions added a handful of wild greens or a few dried beans. In the worst weeks, it was just bread and water and salt. Mothers served it without ceremony, and children ate without complaint because they understood. Pancotto never appeared in Italian-American cookbooks. It was the meal nobody wanted to remember. Number 17. Bacala, salt cod, dried stiff as a board, and sold from wooden barrels in Italian groceries on Grand Street, was a Friday staple in every Catholic household. A pound cost about 15 cents, and it required 2 days of soaking in cold water, with the water changed every few hours before it could be cooked. Mothers fried it in olive oil with potatoes and onions, or simmered it in tomato sauce. The smell of rehydrating bacala was unmistakable, salty and sharp, filling the apartment. On Christmas Eve, bacala appeared in at least 3 different preparations as part of the Feast of the 7 Fishes, a tradition that survived the crossing from southern Italy intact. Number 16. Potato croquettes. Leftover mashed potatoes were never thrown away. Mothers mixed them with egg, grated cheese, and parsley, shaped them into cylinders, rolled them in breadcrumbs, and fried them golden. These croquettes appeared as a side dish, a snack, or a meal when nothing else was available. Children ate them standing in the kitchen, burning their fingers on the hot, crispy shells. The inside stayed creamy and soft. A few potatoes, an egg, and stale bread turned into crumbs, and it became a dish that felt like abundance. Number 15. Sausage and peppers. When a family could scrape together enough for Italian sausage, this was the celebration meal. Sweet and hot sausages fried in a heavy pan with sliced peppers and onions until everything caramelized and the kitchen filled with smoke and sweetness. Italian sausage cost about 20 cents a pound at neighborhood pork stores. The peppers and onions stretched a small amount of meat into enough for the whole table. Piled onto bread or served over polenta, sausage and peppers meant something good had happened. Maybe a father found work for the week. Maybe a relative sent money. The sizzle of that pan was the sound of relief. Dried chickpeas were the poor family's gold in Little Italy. A pound cost a few cents, and the chickpeas doubled in size after being soaked overnight. Mothers simmered them with rosemary, garlic, and a slug of olive oil until the broth turned creamy and thick. Some crushed half the chickpeas against the side of the pot to thicken the liquid. Served with small pasta shapes like ditalini, it became pasta e ceci, one of the most ancient dishes in the Italian repertoire. Filling, warm, and cheap enough to eat 3 times a week without anyone complaining. Second pattern break. Here is something the history books leave out. Little Italy's pushcart economy was a survival system as ingenious as anything the New Deal created. By 1935, over 1,000 pushcarts lined the streets of Lower Manhattan, most of them operated by Italian vendors selling bruised fruit, day-old bread, and vegetables that the uptown markets would not touch. Mothers shopped these carts with a ruthlessness born of necessity, squeezing tomatoes, arguing over a penny difference on a bunch of broccoli rub, and walking away from any vendor who would not bargain. The carts meant that even the poorest families had access to fresh produce, and the Italian instinct to cook seasonally, to eat whatever was cheapest and freshest that day, kept families healthier than their incomes should have allowed. This was not romantic. It was a daily fight, but it worked. Number 13, rapini with garlic. Broccoli rabe, bitter and peppery, was one of the cheapest greens on the pushcarts. Mothers blanched it quickly, then sautéed it with sliced garlic and red pepper flakes in olive oil. Served with bread or tossed with orecchiette, it was a side dish that appeared multiple times a week. The bitterness was polarizing. Children winced. Fathers demanded more. The flavor was aggressive and alive, the opposite of bland American vegetables boiled to mush. Number 12, meatballs without meat. When the budget could not stretch to ground beef, mothers made meatballs from stale bread soaked in milk, mixed with eggs, garlic, cheese, and parsley. No meat at all. The breadcrumb mixture was shaped, fried, and simmered in tomato sauce, and the result was surprisingly convincing. The sauce gave them color and richness. The cheese gave them flavor. Children often could not tell the difference, or at least knew better than to ask. These meatless meatballs showed up in school lunches wrapped in wax paper, indistinguishable from the real thing by the time the sauce had soaked through. Number 11, zucchini flowers. In summer, when zucchini grew wild in backyard plots and window box gardens, mothers picked the bright orange blossoms, stuffed them with a sliver of mozzarella and an anchovy, dipped them in a light batter, and fried them until golden. The flowers were free, and the filling cost almost nothing. The result was delicate, crispy, and gone in 2 bites. Children hovered around the frying pan, snatching them as fast as mothers could cook. Today, stuffed zucchini flowers sell for $6 each at Italian restaurants in Manhattan. In 1935, they were a Tuesday snack because the garden was overgrown. Number 10, pasta with garlic and oil. Aglio e olio was the midnight meal, the nothing in the cupboard meal. The meal that proved Italian cooking needed almost nothing to be extraordinary. Spaghetti tossed in olive oil that had been heated with thinly sliced garlic and red pepper flakes. Maybe a handful of parsley if there was some on the windowsill. The whole dish cost less than a dime and took 12 minutes. But the technique mattered. The garlic had to turn golden, never brown. The oil had to coat every strand. The pasta water starchy and salty, brought everything together. This was the dish that separated Italian cooking from everything else. Maximum flavor from minimum resources. A philosophy born in poverty that became the foundation of an entire cuisine. Number 9. Ricotta and sugar. For dessert, when there was no money for pastries, from Ferrara's on Grand Street, mothers spread fresh ricotta on bread and sprinkled it with sugar. The ricotta was smooth and cool. The sugar crunched slightly. Together it tasted like cheesecake without the effort. A pound of ricotta cost about 10 cents from the Italian cheese shops on Mott Street. Mothers bought it fresh, still draining in cloth, and carried it home in a paper bag. Children ate ricotta and sugar with the same excitement other kids reserved for candy. It was simple, it was honest, and it was the flavor of being told everything would be fine, even when it might not be. Cardoons were common at Italian greengrocers every winter. Mothers stripped the tough outer fibers, boiled the stalks until tender, dipped them in beaten egg and breadcrumbs, and fried them until golden. The flavor was subtle, somewhere between artichoke and celery, and the crispy coating made children eat a vegetable they would otherwise ignore. Cardoons virtually disappeared from American markets by the 1960s. Most people today have never seen one, but in Depression-era Little Italy, they were cheap, plentiful, and proof that Italian cooks could make anything taste good with egg, breadcrumbs, and a pan of hot oil. Number 7. Sunday gravy meat. The pork neck bones, beef braciole, and spare ribs that simmered all day in tomato sauce were not just flavoring agents. They were the week's only real meat. After the pasta was served with the sauce, the meat was pulled from the pot and arranged on a separate platter. It was served as a second course, sliced thin, each piece saturated with tomato and falling apart. The Maillard reaction that occurred over those 6 to 8 hours of low simmering created a depth of flavor that modern science says cannot be replicated in less time. The collagen from the bones melted into the sauce, giving it body and a richness that no amount of store-bought sauce can match. This was chemistry disguised as tradition. Number 6. Fennel salad. Raw fennel, sliced paper thin, dressed with olive oil, lemon, and salt, appeared at nearly every table as a palate cleanser or a side dish. A bulb of fennel cost just a couple of cents. The flavor was bright, anise-scented, and refreshing. Italian families ate it after heavy meals to aid digestion, a practice rooted in centuries of folk medicine. American neighbors found the licorice taste bizarre. Italian mothers shrugged and kept slicing. Fennel now appears on every upscale restaurant menu in America. In 1934, it was immigrant food. Number 5. Caponata. Eggplant stewed with tomatoes, celery, capers, olives, and vinegar became a summer staple when the garden produced more than the family could eat fresh. Mothers cooked large batches, and they served it at room temperature for days, the flavor improving with each passing hour. The sweet and sour balance was Sicilian to its core. A single batch cost almost nothing and lasted the week. Spread on bread, it was lunch. Served alongside fish, it was dinner. Eaten cold from the pot with a fork, it was a midnight snack. Number 4. Pastina in broth. Tiny, star-shaped pasta, cooked in chicken broth with a beaten egg stirred in, was the first food Italian children ate, and the last food elderly relatives requested. It was medicine, comfort, and memory in a bowl. A box of pastina cost a few cents and lasted for weeks. The broth could be made from scraps, chicken feet, and necks that the butcher gave away for free. Mothers made it when children were sick, when the weather turned, when there was nothing else to say but, "Here, eat." Every Italian American alive today can close their eyes and taste pastina. It is the flavor of being small and safe and warm. Number 3. Pasta with sardines. Tinned sardines cost about 5 cents a can in the 1930s, making them one of the cheapest proteins available. Mothers tossed them with hot pasta, breadcrumbs toasted in olive oil, garlic, and a pinch of fennel seed. The sardines broke apart and coated the pasta in a rich, briny sauce. The toasted breadcrumbs, called the poor man's parmesan, added crunch when real cheese was too expensive. This was Sicilian cooking distilled to its essence: salt, fat, crunch, and starch. No waste, no pretension, just food that worked. Frittata di pasta, leftover spaghetti, and there was almost never leftover spaghetti, but when there was, mothers beat it with eggs and cheese and fried the mixture in a heavy skillet until both sides turned golden and crispy. Sliced into wedges, it was served hot or cold, packed into lunch pails, or eaten standing at the kitchen counter. The crispy edges gave way to a soft, cheesy interior. A meal made entirely from scraps that tasted like it was planned all along. Mothers sliced it like pie and wrapped wedges in paper for children heading to school. It was ingenuity that tasted like love. Number 1. Pizza rustica. At the very top sits the dish that represented everything Italian immigrant families were: a thick, double-crusted pie filled with ricotta, eggs, scraps of salami, bits of mozzarella, and whatever cured meat the family had on hand. Mothers made it for Easter, but during the Depression it appeared whenever enough scraps accumulated to justify the effort. The crust was sturdy, made with lard for flakiness. The filling was rich and dense, sliced into squares and served at room temperature. A single pizza rustica could feed a family for 3 days. It used everything, wasted nothing. The last slice tasted as good as the first. This was not pizza as America knows it. This was a monument to thrift built by women who fed families on nothing and made it taste like a feast. Every slice carried the weight of the crossing, the tenement, the pushcart, and the refusal to be broken by poverty. These 30 foods were never meant to be famous. They were meant to keep people alive. What Italian immigrant mothers created in those cramped tenement kitchens on Mulberry Mott and Elizabeth Streets became the foundation of the most beloved cuisine in America. Try one this week: the bread and oil, the aglio e olio, the pastina. Then come back and tell me those women were not geniuses. Share which one your family still makes in the comments. I want to know which of these survived in your kitchen, because that is how traditions stay alive. Not in cookbooks, at the table.